You all should be familiar with our guest tonight, Ms. Jill Noble. She's been doing a series with us, and tonight is the third in our series. This is a very crucial episode. Jill will be discussing education in America in regards to Common Core and what that actually means for not only our education system, our children, but for our country. And from what I understand, it's a little deeper than just dumbing down our children, right, Jill?
Yes, correct. Correct.
Well,
And
welcome, Jill.
Welcome to our
Again.
show once again.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys are so great. You guys are so great.
Your information is so important. I mean, it really is cutting edge where people don't know the stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm finding that to be the case too. Well, let's dive into this because it's deep and then there's a lot of it. I'm not going to go into all of it because it's so much, and people will be they'll just be overwhelmed. And so I'm not I don't want to overwhelm people, but I do want to arm people, with good information. So, okay, so probably I would venture a guess that the majority of your audience have heard of Common Core. I would think. And so if they have not heard of Common Core, quick, go out and arm yourself with what that's all about before we go on, because you're going to need to know a little bit about that. So Common Core came into existence a number of years ago. In 2009 is when we really started seeing it come at the school level. And by the way, I am a licensed and certified public school teacher, and I was teaching school at the time. So what ended up happening in my classroom was my superintendent came in one day and asked if I would hand off my standards, our state standards, and in exchange he handed me a binder, a 3-inch binder with a set of standards. And I said to him, well, what is this? And he said, oh, well, these are the new national standards. They're called Common Core. And I kind of recoiled and I said, well, no, wait a minute. I said, you know, right? You know that's illegal. You know we can't have national standards, right? And he's superintendent, so I think he should know this. And he said, oh, Jill, this is the way things are going. We just need to go along with it. And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. This is illegal. This is a violation of the 10th Amendment. Anything that's not assigned to the federal government, the Constitution, falls to the purview of the states. And there's a reason why education is not in the Constitution, and this is why. Because the Founding Fathers rightly knew that the parents would want control over their children's education. So, with that said, then I didn't want anything to do with these national standards that he was trying to pawn off on me. So I started investigating these standards. He called them Common Core, and they were not yet codified in our state. They were getting ready to be. But I started digging into them, and the more I did, the more troubled I became. First of all, I realized that they were not developmentally appropriate. And I teach special education, and I knew there was no way that my students were going to be able to comply with these standards. It just wasn't going to happen. And not only my students, but I knew that the lower grades were not going to be able to accomplish or perform the particular skill sets that these standards were requiring. Let me give you an example. In the Common Core standards, there's a standard in the reading strand that calls for first graders to be able to read certain passages, and they provide a reading appendix in the back of the Common Core. And so I looked up some of these Common Core aligned materials, and I just randomly opened up one of the books, and I just started typing in the passage to a readability test, and the first grade reader leveled out at 4th grade. Well, this is why little first graders were crying and couldn't get the job done, because they couldn't read at 4th grade level. So I went down the hall of my school, and I pulled basal readers out of every classroom, and I brought them back to my room, and I just flopped them open randomly, and I started typing in the reading passages. And that's when I found that these reading passages were developmentally inappropriate. In other words, The second grade reader, the readability test showed that that was at the ninth grade reading level, and so on. So on it went. In fact, I wrote a paper on it. And I took it to the Senate, and I testified there about the gross developmentally inappropriate materials that were being pushed down on the younger children. All right, so I started looking for like-minded people in the state. I thought, surely I'm not the only person that sees that this is a problem. And we were getting reports out of New York, which we later found out New York had been fully implemented about 3 years before we were. And so I started reaching out to people in New York to find out what was going on, and it was a horror show over there, just terrifying. They actually, the social services came in and declared it, they called it a post-traumatic stress disorder epidemic, because so many children were having meltdowns in the classroom, and absenteeism was at an all-time high, so much so that schools were starting to really get deeply concerned, because children didn't want to come to school, and when they came to school, you know, we were getting reports of them crawling under their desks. They were crying all the time, wetting themselves. It was just a mess. So we continued, you know, to try to get the attention of the legislators and educate them, which we did. And I looked for other people within my state who also were concerned. It was very hard in those first few years because nobody was really paying attention. Mm. And so I found a few other ladies, a few other moms who were as concerned as I was, a couple of teachers, and so we started getting together, and we started writing, we started a blog, and we started a Facebook page, and we just started going out there and kind of sounding the alarm about what was going on. And then, you know, people were asking me, where did this come from? Where did this come from? Well, we were being told at the school level, in the school and education community, we were being told, oh, well, this is a state-led initiative. Well, I just didn't believe it. You know, sometimes you get a feeling in your gut, and I just didn't believe it. And so we knew that our governor had signed us off on this in June of 2009. Now, I live in Missouri, and in June of 2009, our governor, Jay Nixon, signed Missouri off on Common Core. And the problem I had with that was that Common Core officially hadn't been written yet. The standards that I had been given were kind of like a very loose, rough draft. And so he's committed our state to these standards, and in addition to the fact that the standards hadn't been really written yet, he threw off our great Missouri standards, which according to the Thomas Fordham Institute ranked second in the nation. Wow. And so it begged the question, why did you do that? You know, why did you get rid of excellent standards and then give us this junk? And so I started digging deeper, trying to find out, okay, where did this come from? Where did this come from? And I started getting more and more of my answers from New York. We knew that the New York City mayor, Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, we knew that he had brought Common Core into New York about 3 years before the rest of the states. And then I found out that Michael Bloomberg was working in tandem with Doha, Qatar. And in fact, they were getting superintendents from around the country to take little field trips to Doha, Qatar. So I started investigating that, and this is what I found. And I want to kind of set the stage, if you will, for the audience, because this isn't just about education. There is a deeper, nefarious thing going on here, and this is what I learned. Back in way back in 1825, President Thomas Jefferson was he had a bone to pick with the Barbary Coast pirates, And the reason that he did was because the Barbary Coast pirates were bombarding our trade ships. There was prolific trade going back and forth between us and England. And of course there was, because as colonies, we lacked building materials. We lacked nails and glass and hammers, things that we needed to trade with England, on top of tea and sugar and those kinds of things. So we had prolific trade going back and forth between here and England, and there were these pirates, these Barbary Coast pirates, that were bombarding our ships and taking our crew. And so out of sheer exasperation, Thomas Jefferson wanted to bombard them, but our new president, George Washington, said no. He said, let's just pay them an annual tribute and they'll leave us alone. Well, Jefferson didn't believe that, but that's what, Washington was president, that's what they did. They paid the tribute. Did it stop the bombardments? No. And so by the time Jefferson comes around, he's fed up with it. And so Thomas Jefferson, John Jay, and Benjamin Franklin pay a little trip to the ambassador over there and in Tripoli, and they ask him, why are you guys bombarding our ships? And by the way, this letter that Jefferson wrote as a transcript of that visit can be found in the Federal Register, so you can read it for yourself. But basically what the guy said was, we really don't care whether you pay us the money or you don't pay us the money, because we abide by our holy book called the Quran. And in the Quran, it says that we are to kill the infidel wherever he may be found. And so Thomas Jefferson, in sheer exasperation, writes, there's no trying to reason with these people. They are unreasonable. And so he comes back and he pulls up the domestic service that he had employed called the Marines. And for the first time in U.S. history, Thomas Jefferson deploys the U.S. Marines on a foreign deployment. And he sends them to Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and then they come on around the Saudi Peninsula into Doha, Qatar. And they fight there. And they're very successful. It's a very successful campaign. When they came around the peninsula, they bombarded Doha, Qatar. Out of the ashes of Doha, Qatar, arose a family, the Tawny family, T-H-A-N-I, the Tawny family. This family vowed to exact vengeance on this newly found nation, the United States. And so Sheikh bin Khalifa al-Thani was the head of this family, this clan, and he vowed to take vengeance on the United States, not militarily, but from within. And so fast forward to today, we now have the great-great-great-great-grandson of Sheikh bin Khalifa al-Thani, who, by the way, is the owner of Al Jazeera Television. And this sheikh lives in Doha, Qatar. And this sheikh has a foundation called the Qatar Foundation. Michael Bloomberg sits on the board of the Qatar Foundation.
Wow.
Qatar Foundation started Common Core.
Wow.
Michael Bloomberg agreed to bring Common Core into the United States through New York, who was fully implemented for 3 years before it was then pushed on to the states. And we were all lied to. We were told that this was an initiative, that it was state-led, that the National Governors Association brought it in. Well, the National Governors Association were kind of put on point. If you want to continue race to the top money, grant money, then you're going to have to sign off on these sets of 4 assurances. And so 47 of the 50 governors signed off on it, and it hadn't even been written yet.
Wow.
Kind of like if you like your insurance, you'll get to keep your insurance.
Right.
So Common Core comes in to the country, and its entire design is to dumb down our students. It's called Common because they want to find the most base student at the most base level, and that now becomes the bar that's set for the rest of the students. So it is a very intentional dumbing down, and the reason is because it's easier to take over a people group if they are uneducated. Mm-hmm. And you know, I would even say to your audience, Jim and Angie, this whole idea of education, this whole idea of being able to read, that's a technology that was God-given. It was God who decided to put a grapheme symbol onto a writing surface to represent a sound. Mm-hmm. And that sound then became a word, and those words ended up, you know, we have a set of laws that we have constructed all of our civil code by, and those set of laws are called the Ten Commandments. Mm-hmm. God put his own grapheme symbol onto stone. And so it's not too far of a stretch for us to realize that the enemy does not want people to read and write, does not want an educated population, because if you can learn to read, you can pretty much teach yourself anything if you're motivated to do so.
Right.
So,
yeah, just real quick, Jill, I'm sorry. Go circle back a little bit. How many of the governors voted for this?
47 of the 50 governors decided that they were going to do it. The governor of Maine said no, flat out no, he wasn't doing it. The governor of Nebraska did kind of a wonky thing. He took the Common Core is English language arts and math. And so, you know, they tried to do this back in 1996, and they tried to do it through Congress, and they tried to implement history, U.S. history. And Congress took one look at these standards, and the vote was 96-0, and they said no.
So what was the premise that Common Core was a good thing?
They established a validation committee. The writers did. The writers were Jason Zimba and David Coleman. And they established, there were other people involved in the process, Linda Darling Hammond and others who were involved in the process, but they put together a validation committee, and they brought in experts, and it was all such a smoke and mirrors sort of scheme. They brought these experts in, and they wanted them to look at the standards, and then they wanted them to just simply stamp them with their expert approval, right? Well, they didn't bank on Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who's the nation's leading expert in English language arts. She served on the validation committee. She took one look at these standards and said, these will set our students back so far. These are junk standards, and she refused to validate them. Dr. James Milgram was on the math validation committee. He likewise took a look at the standards. He's what we would commonly refer to as a rocket scientist. He works for NASA. He's a genuine mathematician. Jason Zimba was being passed off as a mathematician. He's the writer of the math portion of Common Core, and he's nothing more than a math teacher. Dr. James Milgram is a genuine bona fide mathematician. And he refused to sign off on the standards as well, and said that if these standards are approved and implemented, it will set the students in the United States back by 10 years.
I literally, when you said the kids are getting so frustrated or crying and stuff like that, on my Facebook page, my Facebook friends that have young children, literally the kids would come home and they were crying. And and the parents were trying to help them. And they couldn't figure it out either.
No, right. I've been trained in how to teach Common Core math and Common Core English language arts, and I will tell you, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It's unnecessary. The kids want to give up because they take simple math problems and complicate them unnecessarily, and so the kids just give up, out of frustration.
So, so the end game here is to dumb down America. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
But
yes.
I'm confused because if it's dumbing down, but you in the beginning said that the fourth grade readers were on ninth grade level, it sounds like that would be trying to pull them up.
Well, let me put it to you this way. In every grade level, I also teach reading, and in every grade level, there are certain skills and concepts that you want to introduce to those students at that grade level because they're age appropriate. When you have young children and you're trying to teach them concrete operational skills, they are not developmentally ready to go there. That's why if you say to a very young student, say a first grader, oh, do you believe in Cinderella and Snow White? And she'll say, oh, yeah. And then you'll ask that same student, so do you think in the story of Cinderella that those mice can really turn into horses? And she'll say, yeah. Okay, because in their developmental stage, that's reality. So you're going to teach those students something called, you're going to assign them ordinal value to numbers. So if you show them one M&M and another M&M, and you put them together, how many M&Ms now do we have? And they will go 1, 2. Mm-hmm. Because they take things very literally. Mm-hmm. That's why you can't expect them to perform at a higher level. Okay. Because operationally they can't think that way yet. They're very literal. And you know this with children, you know, yeah. Well, he got more than me. He got 6 more than I did. You know, they fuss over it because they're just little legalists, you know, they're very literal. So now when you get to the older grades, you know, we saw, or I did, when I was doing a readability test on these different pieces of reading, I saw where they kind of tapered off somewhere around the middle school areas, around, so like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They actually showed correct grade level on the readability. Well, Common Core is primarily 3rd through 5th grade. Mm-hmm. Now, they do have Common Core. Common Core really is implemented all the way to 12th grade, but when you get into high school, remember it's reading, language arts, and math. So when you get into high school, they have reading materials that are so very filthy that you would not want your child to read this material. For instance, I would just say to your reader, or to your audience, go and Google Toni Morrison's book called The Bluest Eye. Okay. And there's a passage in there. This story, she's Oprah's good friend. She's the poet, okay? And so she wrote this book, The Bluest Eye, and in there's a passage of this little girl who has been raped by her father. And she's lying on the kitchen floor, and her mother walks in, and she gets beaten. And so, without giving away the punchline, reader or audience, go look that up and go read that, and then ask yourselves, is this something that you could talk around your dinner table at night with your 10th grader? I couldn't.
Wow.
So this is Common Core appropriate. This is what Common Core has approved as 10th grade appropriate reading material. And there's quite a few more. I mean, that isn't just the only one. There's quite a few. So the punchline to all of this is they are trying to introduce an ideology. They're trying to tear down Judeo-Christian ethics, Judeo-Christian mindsets and doctrines. The way that we think as a Christian people, as a Christian nation, they've got to blur those lines and ultimately eradicate those kinds of thinking and behaviors and introduce very strong behavior modification, and that's what they do with the standards.
Jill, who's they?
Good question. Common Core, a lot of people, especially teachers, will come to me and say, Jill, why are you so worked up about this? This is just the next thing. You know, we've had all these education reforms. You know, we've had here in Missouri, we've had whole language, and we've had outcome-based education, and we've had, of course, everybody's had No Child Left Behind. And so, teachers will say to me, well, Jill, this is just the next thing. Why are you getting all worked up about this? This too shall pass. Well, they are right. It is the next thing. However, this is a continuum of something that was started in 1980 when Jimmy Carter signed off to start the Federal Department of Education, which opened its doors in 1980. He established it in 1979, opened its doors in 1980. Now, when that happened, 4 short years later, in 1984, the UNESCO document came out. UNESCO, United Nations document, came out. And Angie, I'll provide a link for you to put this up so that the audience can go check it out. This document is an 81-page document. It's called A Methodological Guide to the Application of the Notion of the Common Core.
Oh my God.
And that was in 1984. Wow. Now, I've read the entire document. And really, it just comes out with 4 pieces. I mean, it's a very dry reading manual. It reads kind of like a military manual. It's kind of difficult to navigate your way through it. But there are really just 4 main pieces, and those 4 main pieces are really what we saw when the governors signed off under the National Governors Association, when they signed off on their 4 assurances. Those 4 assurances were actually what was in the UNESCO document. So when people say, oh, Jill, it's just the next thing, yes, but it is not random or arbitrary. It is by design. You see, in 1992, when Bill Clinton got elected, Mark Tucker, who is the president of an education reform organization in Washington, D.C., he wrote a letter to Hillary. And I will provide you with that letter too, Angie, okay, so that your audience can see it. And it's famously called the Dear Hillary letter. And in this letter, Mark Tucker outlines an education reform to create a global labor workforce. Common Core is designed to dumb down the next generation of workers. No longer, haven't you heard people complain that in school they're not really teaching like arts, the literature? Mm-hmm. Some schools don't even have recess or music or any of this more. Okay, that's on purpose, because they're creating a labor workforce, a global labor workforce, and they need that workforce to be uneducated or dumbed down so that they will be more compliant. And so Mark Tucker, outlines all of that in his infamous Dear Hillary letter. And so we began to see the implementation of Mark Tucker's letter through these various education reforms, such as whole language, which we know there's an entire generation of adults today who can't read phonetically because they were taught whole language, which is an absolute disaster. And then we also know in the Mark Tucker letter, there was a call for values clarification. And again, we have a whole generation of adults who went through this extreme behavior modification technique. And you may remember it. You've got 3 people in a boat. You've got enough water for only 2 people. Who are you going to throw overboard? And what will be the criteria that you'll use to determine who gets thrown overboard? So they desensitize and normalize the destruction of human life or the diminishing of human life, and they do it through these kinds of mechanisms. And so back to the Mark Tucker letter, so that letter came out in 1992. It was also added into the Federal Registry. I don't know why it was, but it was. But you can find it online. And again, Angie, I'll provide you the link for that so you can put it up too so that everybody can read it. So then, as you move forward through the years, you can see that all these education reforms were climaxing toward what we now have as Common Core. And Common Core isn't the end of the line. This is not where it's going to end. Under the Obama administration, before he left office, he signed us off on Every Student Succeeds Act. And that act has now replaced No Child Left Behind. Now, lest people think, we dodged a bullet. We don't have that horrible No Child Left Behind anymore. Now we got this thing, and this is much better. No, it's not. You remember last week I talked to you about the affirmatively furthering fair housing. That's actually embedded in the Every Student Succeeds Act. In the Every Student Succeeds Act, there is provision in there for something called social emotional learning. And social emotional learning, again, I'm going to provide you with the link for this, Angie, because your audience is going to want to go and see this. And I will give a little warning. It's very profane. It's very pornographic.
Wow.
So make sure children are not around when you go to look at this. But this is actually being taught in schools. We've got this being taught in schools here in Missouri. Under social emotional learning, there's a curriculum that has been developed by a couple of lesbian women out of Washington State. And this curriculum is now all the rave to teach for districts to teach social emotional learning. And they want to break down the student so that there is absolutely no resistance to the idea of homosexuality or pedophilia or transgenderism,
Yes.
any of the things that Judeo-Christian families would consider taboo and off limits. So social emotional learning, you're sending your darlings off to school every morning and putting them on the school bus. And I will tell you, I've cried a river over this, guys. I mean, for months and months and months, I'd go to bed at night and all I could see were the millions of little baby children getting on the school bus, and it was just tearing me up because moms and dads are so grossly unaware of what's happening to their sweet, precious children when they go off to school. And so, again, I'm here to sound the alarm. We've got to wake up. Parents, you've got to wake up. You think everything looks great and everything's fine in your school, but listen, go and check it out. Make yourself get involved. We're in a very perilous moment here, very dangerous moment. So these children go to school, they are cultivated, inoculated, and modified in their behavior and their thinking. And they are challenged to question authority, they're challenged to question parental authority. And in Missouri, where I live, we have a law that was passed in 1996 under Mel Carnahan, who was the governor at the time, and it's called the Outstanding Schools Act. And that one single act did the most damage to erode parental authority here in our state. Parents in Missouri, if you're watching, you need to know that when you take your children to the schoolhouse door and you drop them off, that you have just transferred your parental authority to the school for the 8 hours that those children are in that building. And the school has legal jurisdiction to take your child to a doctor, to a psychiatrist, to get an abortion without knowledge or consent from the parents. And is that happening? Yes, it is. I'm helping a woman right now who we've been working with this situation for a couple of years now. This dear woman and her husband took their children to go in high school, took them in for the day before school starts. We go in and get your locker and get your books and go look at your classrooms and all that. And they took their high school kids in, couldn't find their son. And they were all going to go out and have lunch afterwards, and they looked, couldn't find the son. Well, come to find out, the school had whisked him away into the counselor's office and had convinced him that he really didn't need his parents, that he was old enough to be on his own, and they got that child emancipated from his parents before the day's end on that day. And the mother and father knew nothing about it. They just couldn't find him. And a restraining order was put against the parents. And this is a true story. This is an absolute 100% true story. The restraining order was placed against the parents. These parents were fine, upstanding people in the community, not abusers, not drug-addicted people, wonderful, devout Christian people. The father's a doctor. Mother's gone back to school to get her degree in counseling. Very intelligent, articulate, kind, loving family. It's just that they had a rebellious kid. And the schools are pandering to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so they removed the child from the home. In fact, they not only removed the son, in whom they have not seen in 3 years, but they removed the next child. And now she's down to her third child, and she has no doubt in her mind they're going to go after that child when she gets into high school next year.
Listen
So,
to me. Wow.
all that to say that we're up against some very hard things, some very dangerous things, and parents need to be aware and understand the school is not your friend necessarily. And I know there's going to be people watching who are superintendents and school board members and maybe school teachers and what have you. But I will tell you, I can assure you, everything I'm telling you is documented. We have absolute first-hand accounts of some of the things that have happened, as well as the fact that Common Core has come straight out of Islam, and they plan to introduce Islamic indoctrination into the schools, and they are doing this already in many, many states. And the goal of the entire thing is to dumb down the United States so that the next generation will be completely pliable in the hands of these people.
So I'm going to circle back a bit here. So once again, the they that we were talking about is the system.
United Nations.
UN.
Oh, it's
The UN.
but it's the United Nations, but Democrats and Republicans are both complicit in allowing this to happen in our country.
Well, yes, they are. When we started introducing our bill, I was involved in the process of writing a bill here in Missouri, House Bill 1490, and we called it our Kill Common Core bill. And when the bill actually got it, we had wide support in both the House and the Senate and both sides of the aisle, because parents were starting to wake up and legislators were starting to wake up. But this thing is it's so powerful, and it goes so far back. There's a lot of people hidden in the shadows pulling the strings, and I know you know what I'm talking about. Our bill got very close to getting voted in so that we would outlaw Common Core. We would have been the very first state to have done so. And right before it went to the floor for a final vote, the speaker took it into conference, gutted the bill, and took it back out again. And we watched it very closely. And when it came back out, we did not have time to run through the Capitol and notify the senators that this was not the same bill. And so they thought they were voting on the pure bill, the one that we had written. And so, of course, when it went to the floor for a vote, they voted for it. And therefore, they voted in a bill that did not kill Common Core. It called for the establishment of work groups to rewrite the standards. And I was appointed by the lieutenant governor to serve on those work groups to rewrite the standards. And I will tell you this, that was the most hellish experience I've ever been involved in my life. The people that were on that work group, the governor who brought Common Core into the state in the first place, had stacked the work group with a majority of pro-Common Core advocates. And so I was on the English Language Arts work group. We even brought in Dr. Sandra Stotsky to testify and to offer up her expert advice on the standards, and they wouldn't let her speak.
Wow.
It was shocking. So, yes, this goes back to the UN. Remember a few weeks ago when we talked, and I was talking about the New World Order, sustainable development? Well, goal number 4 of sustainable development is education. And this that we're talking about has come right out of that goal. So your audience can go and Google sustainable development, go to goal number 4, and you'll see all of these things. Now, they talk in doublespeak, and I've told you this before. So you think you know what they're talking about, and you think, oh, okay, well, that doesn't sound too bad. You know, I can kind of go along with this. But you really need to dig a little deeper and find out, what do they mean when they say certain catchphrases? Because it's designed to trick us and to get us to just go along. So
wow. So one last question for me, and then I can't speak for Angie, but so Donald Trump campaigned completely against Common Core. I'd like to, and actually what he said is he wants to put all that to the state. He doesn't want to be a federal decision. What is the situation right now as far as Common Core under the Trump administration?
Well, you're absolutely right, Jim. He campaigned that he was going to get rid of Common Core. And so, honestly, that was music to the ears of millions of parents. And that, I think that was one of the selling points of his campaign, actually, because Common Core had reached such an epic proportion and people were just fed up. You know, when it becomes reality at your dining room table every night, you know, when you can't help your kids with the homework, and when the kids are so depressed, you know, that they don't want to go back to school, and it disrupts so much. It disrupts the parents at work, and you get it. So where are we right now? Trump appointed Betsy DeVos, who is now, she's been confirmed, and she is now the education commissioner for the United States, education secretary, excuse me, for the United States. She's the Secretary of Education appointed by Trump. Now, I'm not particularly a fan of Betsy DeVos. She says she hates Common Core, but she serves still to this very day on Jeb Bush's board, which supports Common Core. And honestly, we could do a whole show about Betsy DeVos. And the things that we've uncovered about her. I don't think she's necessarily our friend. She's pushing for choice. She's pushing for parents to have choice. And that all sounds wonderful. Parents think that's going to be wonderful. But the money will only go to the 11 million low-income families. And I mean, I don't want to get off on that. I could talk all night about just that.
It sounds like redistribution of wealth to me again.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
All right.
So my last question would be, I think the other state, maybe the other state governor that you didn't mention might have been Texas. I know Texas doesn't have Common Core. But when you and I spoke several weeks ago, you said we had something in place of that. Would you go into that and help me understand that?
Texas has what's called STAR, and really it's Common Core. Mike Pence, who is now our vice president, Mike Pence started this whole thing with Indiana when Missouri came so very close to getting rid of Common Core, and about the time our bill was headed to the Senate to kill Common Core, Indiana, we kept our eye on Indiana, and Mike Pence claimed that Indiana got rid of Common Core, but he didn't. They didn't. They just rebranded it, and they called it, I don't even remember what they called it, but we got copies of it, and we did a crosswalk with it, and it's Common Core. And so what we saw then from Indiana to Missouri, it was like they were in communication with the people over here, and they were encouraging people over here, just pass the standards or rewrite the standards, but don't deviate. In fact, we had one state rep say to us in our Common Core, in our meeting to rewrite the standards, he went to the press and said, I don't see much more than a 2% change between Common Core and what these people are going to write. And I was so offended by that because I was in that work group to get rid of Common Core. But what ended up happening was we got Common Core, and if you're listening to this right now and you live in Missouri and the school district is telling you, oh, don't worry, we don't have Common Core, that's a lie. That's an absolute lie. I was there for the entire process. I was there at the State Board of Education meeting when the State Board of Education voted in the standards, which are simply warmed over Common Core.
Wow.
So, yeah. I get a little angry about it.
Yeah.
You know what, Jill? If we had millions of you going to these meetings and saying, no, we still do have Common Core, you're lying, we would make change here in America. And I think that we really have to look carefully at the next few months to a year and make sure that it's not the old Who, the group The Who lyrics, meet the old boss, same as the new boss.
Yes.
You know, or meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Right. So we just have to, we got to keep strong about getting our voices out like you're doing.
Well, I say this all the time. I do meetings all the time. I just did a meeting a couple of days ago and had quite a few legislators in the meeting. And I was talking to some legislators today by phone who called me, wanting to put together an education reform package that's not federally aligned. It's parentally aligned, if you follow my drift. Yeah. And so my response to that, Jim, is don't let Jim and Angie do the heavy lifting. Don't let Jill Noble do the heavy lifting. John Doe, Jane Doe, whoever you are out there, you need to get engaged. You need to get involved. You need to be paying attention, writing letters, writing emails. Go to your state capitol. If for no other reason, just sit in on some hearings. Right. And get yourself comfortable with the surroundings and with who these players are. I mean, you know, I was just a mom. Just slugging out life. You know, I've got all my children, you know, and we're just doing life, right? And I find this thing that is so bad, I can't sleep at night. Mm-hmm. And so I was called to action because I couldn't just not let this go. Yeah. And so if that's you and you're watching this, get up and go do something. Don't just sit there. We're losing our country. We're losing our children, yes. Our family, all the institutions that we have taken for granted that will always be here are not always going to be here. Right. If we don't act, and the midnight hour is fast approaching.
Yes, it is. I see that in all of the vast subjects that we cover with all of our different guests, it always comes back to really we have to fight for our children, or our children yes. have no future in education, the food that they're eating, the water that they're drinking, the air that they're breathing, the history they're being taught, everything is about our children. We are losing them.
Right. Yes. Yeah, you're right. We're losing our children, we're losing our country, and we're losing our freedoms.
Yes.
And,
yes.
I mean, and you know, Jill, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you have?
Not unless she has other
Jill,
stuff.
do you have any? We're going to have you on more and more and more, whether you like it or not. We're going to. We're going to twist your arm because we love your.
There's so much that we can talk about, you know.
And we will. What a great message, though.
You are great. You are educating us so much, and we really appreciate it. Like I had said before, most of the people have no idea that, because they smooth it over and put such a nice name on it that sounds so positive, and underneath it, it's just, we have no idea.
Yeah, Jill Noble, thank you so much for getting out there and actually doing something, not just talking about it, but doing something. Yes. We really appreciate you, and God bless you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Angie.
Bye.